Best B2B sales and marketing superheroes to share their best tips and tricks to guide you to becoming your very own superhero. This week, I'm joined by Tom Edwards, Digital Director at Archetype, host of the Complete Tech Heads podcast, and returning guest to Elite Forensics webinar. How are you doing today, Tom?
Hello, Joe. Yes, I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, great to talk to you.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. It's lovely to have you back on, Tom. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. For the webinar today, which is titled Breaking Bland How to Make Your B2B Content Engaging, we're going to be arming you with the superpowers to defeat blandness and craft content that truly captivates your audience. You're going to break free from the chains of mediocrity and embark on the B2B content revolution. So, my first question to you here, Tom, um, just to set out our stall slightly, what are the key differences between B2B and B2C content, and how can we make B2B content just as engaging as that of B2C?
Yeah, obviously, the main difference is the clues in the name, right? So B2B is for business audiences, and B2C is for consumers. So immediately, straight off the bat, you've got a far bigger, wider net that you're casting with B2C, and so you can leverage things like celebrity culture and sports and all of that sort of stuff that has very, very large audiences to drive engagement. Whereas with B2B, you, people tend to be a little bit more risk averse, I think,
Mm,
because you have a lot more sign offs, and you have a lot more um, a lot more built in assumptions about who your audience is. And people kind of tend to look at, the LinkedIn audience targeting or whatever, and you see it's all directors and CEOs or whoever you're targeting. And it does tend more to be on the senior side in my experience, um, which isn't necessarily the right thing to do, but that's the way it is. That's where people believe the decision makers are, and so they think that they need to be more risk averse in targeting them, because businesses are much more concerned about the way that they're presenting themselves, I think, to these more kind of higher value target audiences. Um, so yeah, you tend to have, I think, a little bit less, not creativity, but you tend to be a little bit more restricted in your creative roots with B2B.
mm.
And so I think one of the ways that you can potentially bring your B2B content more in line with kind of B2C outlet, let's say, is to take more risks and to try to think outside the box a little bit more, and to encourage your internal stakeholders to push the boundaries a little bit, would be my first kind of stake in the ground.
Well, in terms of that sort of the creativity side of things, then, so what something that I've often found with in certain walks of life is that restriction does often breed creativity. So that's why with Lee Forensic being on the brand team myself, we really enjoy like, okay, so this is the corridor we've got to fit into. What can we do within those restrictions? So I do enjoy that side of things. But
Yeah.
something that you mentioned quite early on in your answer was referencing celebrity culture or pop culture or something like that. Does that mean there is no place for that sort of discussion or ideas in B2B?
No, I don't think so. I think part of the reason is that those kinds of elements tend to be less relevant to the product that you're selling in B2B. So, consumer brands, like makeup brands or fast food brands or whatever, they'll have more kind of relevance to those celebrities. There'll be um, more of a natural connection there. Whereas with B2B, your influencers often will tend to be business people themselves, and so they tend to already have a job, and it's difficult to find a business influencer with a large enough audience that is going to be a price point that's going to work, because it doesn't it tends not to be their full time job. A business influencer will tend to already have a very, well paid and time intensive job in their field, and will tend to be kind of posting on social media in their spare time to build their own network and their own audience. So finding those brand partnerships tends to be a bit more difficult. Speaking about celebrity culture more generally, I think you definitely can. And the real golden um, nuggets are where you can find that crossover, where there is, popular culture is crossing over into what your business does, which people tend to refer to as B2B to C, right? Where you're talking to business people as consumers. And there are lots of brands, particularly tech brands that are tending to do that very well.
Yeah, I suppose on it's I think it's slightly easier to do on the social media side of things versus, when we discuss content, like emails, blogs, that sort of thing. On your social side of things, I think there's definitely an appetite for um propagating memes or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Referencing pop culture of the
Yeah.
moment, that capturing that zeitgeist, but then relating it back to your product. That's something that we very much leverage all the time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, there was like, there are lots of cultural moments that businesses tend to get involved with. Like there was the Wes Anderson thing, right? Where everyone was filming like skits in the style of Wes Anderson. There are lots of businesses that jumps on that. The Roman Empire is another recent one where, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? I don't know if you've come across this, right? Yeah. So lots of businesses have been riffing on thinking about the Roman Empire, and we've seen that a lot with our clients as well, and they tend to do well. Like if you can get involved in that cultural moment, I think there's a reason why memes explode and then drop off. It's because we have this kind of inbuilt kind of social engagement mechanism where we all kind of want to get involved in the current
Mm.
thing, right? And audiences of business to business brands are no different to B2C brands in that regard. I think they do tend to do quite well. And again, that kind of comes back to my earlier point, which is the brands that are prepared to take a few more risks will be able to leverage that and generate that engagement. Whereas if you've got 1,000 sign-offs, by the time you get to actually posting it, it's old news and you don't get any engagement at all. So and you look like you're behind the times, so like it's yeah, if you're going to do that kind of thing, you have to do it quickly and it has to be part of your kind of brand tone of voice as well. It doesn't work for everyone. And
Mm.
if you are, if you're working in perhaps a much more serious industry, if you're like a, I don't know, cybersecurity firm or something, it might not work. And it might not be the kind of thing that you want your brand to be talking about. So you've kind of got to define your brand tone of voice before you get involved in this. If you've got more of a kind of laid back, um, kind of personable brand, which, as I say, you tend to get a lot in tech firms,
Mm.
um, then you can get away with it. People kind of expect it more of that kind of company.
Are there any examples of B2B companies that have, successfully shared or created even engaging content? And what are the factors of those strategies that made them stand out?
Yeah, so I mean, one that really stood out to me was a campaign that Fiverr did, Fiverr.com, with two R's, um, where it was they got all of their team to change their job titles on LinkedIn, and they put them to like kind of silly things or things to do with their personality that aren't necessarily to do with their job. Like, the person who complains about the washing up in the kitchen or whatever. It was like, creative producer and, dog mummy or, whatever it is, like little things like that. And I thought it was genius because it's leveraging the algorithm, right? So people's job title changes get incredible reach because LinkedIn thinks that this is a really, incredible life moment. Everybody congratulates people who get a new job title or a promotion or a move, and so it gets huge algorithm distribution, and so it worked perfectly. I think I saw it everywhere on my feed, and because it was leveraging that quirk of the algorithm, it did insane engagement, and it also kind of told a story about Fiverr being a kind of friendly,
Mm.
fun brand, and they're a B2C brand. They're marketing to freelancers and people who buy freelancers, so it works across all of that because it's talking about it's aligning your job with your passion, which is exactly what freelancers on Fiverr are doing. So yeah, I thought that was really, really clever. And they also combined it with like an out of home campaign as well. So they put a lot of these silly job titles on out of home ads. So yeah, thought that was very, very clever. Um, there's a guy called Rob Mayhew. I don't know if you've come across him. He's a TikTok and LinkedIn influencer. He does a few different brand partnerships. I think Expedia was one of them. He's done others, but he does skits about the marketing world. So I mean, you'd love it. As with any marketers watching this, I'm sure most people watching this will have probably already heard of him. But
Mm.
um, he kind of just puts a um, kind of not sarcastic, but just a humorous slant on day-to-day business in the
Mm.
marketing world, particularly the marketing agency world. But I think, in-house marketers will get it as well. He kind of pokes fun at the pitch process and about like how last minute creative ideas usually are. He's forever talking about how yeah, we just made this idea up 12 hours ago and it's like the big idea and stuff like that.
Mm.
So he's great. And again, I think the it's kind of links back to things we've been saying, which is that it's kind of it's taking B2B outside of that kind of stuffy suit and tie,
Mhm.
serious mentality, and bringing it into a world of human beings who have quirks and foibles and are a bit silly. And that's why it works so well. And that's why it gets so much engagement, and why it's, people are like, you look at the comments and it's just people saying, lol, this happened, this exact same thing happened in my office last week, whatever. It's relatable. And I think it's difficult to be relatable if you're sticking strictly within your
Mm.
business parameters. To be relatable, you have to be a human being. And so that's why he works so well. Um, yeah.
So what are the? I mean, we've mentioned, sticking to the stuffy sort of suited corporate, you know, uh, personas that you put out with your content sort of thing. What are the other common mistakes that B2B companies make with their content?
So I think the biggest one, which is like a timeless mistake, is talking about yourself and not talking about your customers, which happens a lot. Like, often you look at a landing page and you can tell immediately whether it's talking to the customer or whether it's the business talking about themselves. And audiences are interested in themselves, yeah, as we all are, right? Like, we're people are interested in themselves and what problems they have and what their day to day is. They're browsing social media. They're taking time out of an otherwise very busy day doing something else, to get some updates on the industry, but generally stuff that's going to entertain and engage and educate them. So the most important thing is to talk about your customer rather than you, and try to address their pain points, try to address their lives, try to address what 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 the vision of their future could be like if you work together, rather than, we've developed this amazing platform, we've analyzed all of these, millions of data sets, we can do this and we can do that and we can do this. It's like, nobody cares about how wonderful your algorithm is, but they might care if it turns out that that algorithm can really, make a big impact to their day to day and make them look good in front of their boss and get them a promotion, and then they can have the beach house and the wonderful retirement, with a pina colada and, a sun lounger, right? That's where they want to get to. Help them get there, with your amazing algorithm, then great. Then they're going to listen. But
Mm.
just building your amazing algorithm and how wonderful you are, I don't think people are going to be too interested in. That's the thing that I see coming up most of all. Um, and I think you see the biggest dichotomy on that is in tech again. Like, you see some tech brands that do it super super well, and others who fall into that hole of just raving about how amazing they are and how clever they are and how
Mm.
how many data points they've got. Um, yeah, and then the other one, as we've kind of already touched on, is risk avoidance. I think in B2B there can be a tendency towards avoiding risk, playing it safe, um, but then you can't marry that with shooting for, extraordinary results. You can't ask for a very ordinary compliance process and risk, appetite, and then expect out of the ordinary results. So I think
Mm.
breaking down those barriers to taking a few risks is also an important one.
It is an incredibly tricky feat, isn't it? Just to, because here we're saying, okay, well, you try and marry, the zeitgeist with creativity, but maintaining that, taking more. It's not an easy thing to
No.
create an engaging piece of content, is it at all? So, but what I wanted to ask you about, Tom, is you were saying there about showing your customers how your product, service, whatever it is that you're selling, how that can help their lives and how can they see their future with you once how do you maintain that long lasting engagement and long lasting audience with those people?
Long lasting engagement with like, so what, how do you hold on to that engagement over a long period of time with your
Yeah,
audience?
getting convince walking people to that door of saying, hey, stick with us because we can help you. That's probably a cornerstone of it, but what else can you do to keep them coming back to you, almost making a community almost, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, so there are obviously there are plenty of, loyalty tactics that you can employ to kind of keep people engaging with you. I think it's also important to look at different platforms. So like I've found as a, as a content creator outside of the day job, there's a big difference in the consistency of engagement on different platforms. So I find, for example, so I'll do a podcast episode once a week, right? Which is video and audio. So the podcast audio audience, very consistent week after week. So it will, it will grow pretty consistently, and it will fluctuate slightly, but you don't have, I don't ever have real dead weeks. Whereas on, YouTube, LinkedIn, um, X to a lesser degree actually, but I've got more followers there. Um, excuse me. That can really fluctuate. So if the algorithm doesn't like a piece of content on YouTube, it just gets nothing, right? So it will give you your first 500 impressions or whatever. If you're not getting the click through rate off of those, then it's just dead. Whereas the other side is that it can shoot up and you can be hitting thousands and thousands of views if it does like it, but it'll it will fluctuate to a far greater degree, and that's the same with LinkedIn as well. So understanding the differences between platforms is really important, and so stuff like podcast you will find is much more consistent. I think email's an interesting one as well because you own the data with email. Um, you have much more insight into the nuts and bolts of where your engagement's coming from. And if you get email right, you can make that much more consistent. You can get to a stage where people are opening every one. So like companies like BuzzSumo do that really well. I open every email I get from BuzzSumo because it's full of really genuinely interesting insight, which I know is relevant to me and my job. All about social media, all about the algorithms, all about what's trending, all of that stuff. So um, you can build up those kinds of habits, and the difference we're talking about here, really, if you think, email and podcasts on one side and LinkedIn, YouTube platforms on the other, is ownership of the distribution, right? So with podcasts and email, the data's the customers are yours. You're distributing your content to them pretty directly. I mean, certainly
Mm,
with email, less so with podcasts because obviously you're going through Apple and Spotify, but it's a much closer relationship. Whereas YouTube and LinkedIn and Instagram and whatever else, you're very dependent on their distribution, and it's about so they'll test it among a few audiences that they think are relevant by the keywords, and then that's it. Subscribers aren't as important as they used to be on YouTube anymore. So yeah, I think that's the main thing is understanding your different platforms, and obviously embedded in that point is consistent quality. And I think as an individual, it's much more difficult. So, I will find I have duff weeks, right? Because sometimes it's just me. And we're human beings. We fluctuate in our abilities. Sometimes we have a bad week, right? Whereas as a business, as a marketing team, you should be able to maintain the quality. If you've got a good team, and you've got ideas coming in from different places, and you've got that kind of agile, quick sign off process to make sure that good stuff is going out quickly, that you're tapping on those trends, then maintaining that consistent quality over time should mean that people keep coming back.
Mm.
And yeah, I think you will tend to see it's like the stability comes from the owned data, but the growth will tend to come from the, the platforms, because if you do strike gold, then it will shoot up into the sky, and then hopefully what you can do is by maintaining your consistent quality over time, you can harvest some of that, some of the audiences that have come in over that one, you know, successful piece of content, make them stick around. And so if you can get a few peaks, but from every one of those peaks, you've got a percentage of them that are sticking around for the more consistent, ongoing relationship, then you'll be doing well.
That's it, isn't it? It's something perhaps we've not particularly mentioned too much because, you know, for us, it's kind of inherent, isn't it? But you want to be offering genuine value as well as, like, you know, if you can, if it's entertaining as well, then that's you know, the high country, isn't it? But you do have to offer genuine value. As you mentioned, the emails that you open consistently, it's because there is something useful in there for you.
Yeah,
um
yeah,
so no,
100%.
that I think that's a really, that's a crucial point, actually. And knowing the platforms as well, I think you're absolutely spot on. It's really interesting what you're saying about, you know, obviously the audio podcasts, they're a lot more consistent than, you know,
Yeah,
the other bits. That's because it's people on their way to work. It's while they're doing
yeah,
something. It's, oh,
yeah, and
it's Monday. It's a new complete decade, you know? So
right, yeah, exactly, and it's habit forming. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so being consistent, I try to publish on the same day every week,
Mm.
because I'm trying to build those habits. And look, I'm sure it's the same for you. I'm sure you're always thinking about how can we build the habits where we're providing value on a regular basis so that people know that they want to come back. Um, so yeah, I think it's important to, consistency above all else is, is what I would say. I think that's, going back to your previous question about what mistakes to brands make. I think another big one is inconsistency. So they'll try, like, SEO is the classic one, right? But they'll try SEO for like 3 months and then not see any results, and then assume that SEO is not going to work for them. It's like, well, SEO, you're not going to see any results for at least six, and really your SEO strategy should be looking years ahead,
Mm.
because it's just that's the way it works. Ditto any kind of digital marketing campaign, really. Like, if you're not consistent over time, but like, you see brands doing podcasts as well, and they'll do six, right? And they'll throw the kitchen sink at six, and then they'll get some listens, and it'll do okay, and they'll get some engagement, but because it hasn't immediately paid back the ROI, that they spent on it, they'll say, "Well, no, we tried podcasts, it doesn't work." And it's
Mm.
like, well, look, you look at any podcast, look at the biggest podcasts in the world. Look at Lex Friedman or Joe Rogan. They've been doing it for years,
Mm.
and it's hockey stick growth. It's you you have to keep going with very little engagement beyond the point where it feels like it's not doing anything, and only then will you start to grow. And that's something that I think people are guilty of, but brands certainly are, because on a brand level, you've you've obviously, in the meantime, you've got people changing, in the agency and in the company. You've got um, budgets changing every quarter. There's a reassessment of what's working and what's not, and so things get budgets get pulled, budgets get reinvested elsewhere. So it's even more difficult to maintain consistency, um, as a brand. But if you can, you'll reap the rewards, in my opinion.
Absolutely. But
Like you guys, right?
so,
I mean, you've been really consistent with these, and like, I suspect it's you're reaping rewards, right?
oh, well, yeah, 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 definitely the consistency is definitely, has definitely helped put us a bit further ahead of where we have been previously, 100%.
Yeah,
Um,
and I see your content in my feed all the time, and I'm sure it's, you know, and also, like, obviously I've got a relationship with you guys. I've done one of these before, and I know a few of your of your colleagues over at Lead Forensics. So I'm aware of you. But if I wasn't, and I'd seen that content in my feed every week, even if I'm just scrolling past most of them,
Mm.
I'm still recognizing it. And if you do that, you compound that over years, it's going to be just a much higher degree of brand recognition than just doing a few, seeing how it goes, and then trying something else.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, well, no, I'm pleased that, we're reaching to you, Tom. That's, that's
You
very
are, yeah, yeah.
encouraging. Um, do you have any, tips on, because, something that particularly with, video, something that comes to mind, and this may seem like a sort of roundabout way of saying this, but it will come to a point that's worth making. Uh, there's such a thing with video content as the millennial pause. Are you aware of the millennial pause, Tom?
Yeah, yeah, I am. Yeah, it was kicking around online a while ago, was it? Is it where the video starts and then you don't say anything for a second because you're waiting
Mm.
for it to start recording, whereas Gen Z, their phones
Just
have got much better, and so they start talking straight away.
yeah, that's exactly it. So, and
Right.
if
Okay.
if there is a pause, they just skip to the next thing. So, it's sort of to illustrate. There's a point to illustrate my next question for you. If you've only got you know, a fraction of a second to grab somebody's attention. Have you got any tips on crafting like attention grabbing introductions for B2B content? Not necessarily video. It could be, about subject lines for emails, anything like that, a thumbnail. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're absolutely right on video. Like, you've got very, very little time to engage people, and yeah, look, it's difficult. I think so. A general point, people tend to engage with faces, human faces. People like faces, which obviously has obvious evolutionary grounding, right? Like we respond to other people's faces, especially attractive faces. So if you've got someone with an attractive face, I mean, I don't know how this show is going to do in that context. So you and me, we'll do our best. But yeah, so yeah, faces are good. Like, I think generally with this point, you know, if I was speaking pre AI revolution, I would have said some things, but I think that generative AI has kind of thrown the rule book into the bonfire now. It's like, because usually you say, well, like try and get some kind of original, engaging imagery, get lots of bright colors, whatever. But everyone's got that now. Everyone's using Midjourney, and all of their visuals look incredible. People are, and I would have said, if you've got just a static, then maybe try to do something with motion. That's all really easy to do now, and lots of people are doing that. So, yeah, I think the most important thing really is testing and learning and leveraging AI to try a bunch of stuff and see what works, because the opportunity cost now to creating a high volume of different assets for the same kind of message is much smaller. So you can do that much easier. Um, so you can try out a bunch of stuff and see what sticks. There is also, like, there are some uh, psychological quirks of humans that you can leverage. So, faces is one of them, but also the color red. It tends to it signals danger, and there is a negativity bias as well, which doesn't work for all brands. I think B2B brands tend to steer clear of this, but you see it in we see it on YouTube. Everything is terrifying, or someone destroys someone else, or it's
Mm.
like there's um, shocking and with a negative slant tends to do really well. And like you get it in PR as well. So if you put out a press release, if it's got a like you can if you've got a data story, and there are two ways you can phrase it. One is like X% of people think everything's great, or the other one is X% of people think everything's terrible. The one where everything's terrible is much more likely to get picked up by journalists, because journalists have this negativity bias. And the reason journalists have the negativity bias is because they know that their readers have the negativity bias. And I used to be a journalist, and a digital journalist, at Telegraph and the Sun. And you see it. You see it when because you get immediate feedback on articles that you publish.
Yeah.
And obviously they've got big audiences, so it's large data sets. And you see that the articles that have got um, some kind of negativity bias will tend to be more engaging. Um, but yeah, with B2B, obviously you're always balancing that with the fact that you don't necessarily want that to be the perception of your brand.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. But like you say, we'll stick with the positive note on that, Tom. We'll
Yeah.
stick with some nice happy faces.
Yeah. 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 I mean, obviously, the ideal one is nice, happy, good-looking face, awful, world is collapsing headline,
Look,
and then everyone's gonna click. Yeah.
Tom, I'm going to start to wrap up our conversation here today. You've, as ever, offered up some incredible value for our audience. But just before I come to you with the one final point, obviously, this is B2B superheroes, and many superheroes have the power, as you know, of invisibility. But wouldn't it be great to be able to reveal the invisible B2B visitors to your website? Lead Forensics is software which identifies visitors to your site, showing you their customer journey, what links they've clicked on, pages they've looked at, and all in real time. If you'd like to book an obligation free trial or sit a demo with us, just let me know on the poll, which is on the screen right now. And I'll leave that up until as we come to the end of our conversation with Tom. If I could also ask you to fill out the webinar feedback form as well, I would hugely appreciate hearing what you loved about this webinar. So, Tom, as I mentioned, you've provided us with loads of takeaways on how to create B2B content which is engaging. But if I could ask you for just one top tip, one absolute golden rule for everybody watching this to take away with them today, what would that one piece of advice be?
God, I don't know. I, I, I guess the big thing now is a point that I've kind of already made, but it is well, I'll combine 2 points. So it's the risk taking point and the AI point, right? So my advice would be l- use AI to test and learn and take some risks and do things differently, and throw out a load of content out there because we're at a very unique moment in history where you can do that. You can whatever level you're at within an organization, whether you've got design experience or developer experience or whatever, if you've got none of those, you can create stuff. And so we're really on the brink, I believe, of a golden age of creativity, and that will be the case in marketing as it will be in the world more broadly. So make best use of it would be my advice. Get out there, have some ideas, put them into practice, show people around you what you're doing, and try to kind of put them out there into the world because there's a lot of opportunity right now.
Excellent stuff. Tom, thank you so much for sharing your B2B superpowers with us today. Remember to keep an eye on Lead Forensic socials for news of our upcoming webinars, and we will see you again very, very soon. But for now, Tom, thank you so much.